I have every confidence that Eugenia Kim has been waiting serenely online through all of that and is able to join us now. Do we have Eugenia ready to go? Welcome, Eugenia. It's lovely to see you. Over to you. We're really looking forward to hearing your paper. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And just for a bit of context, I am an American, born and raised there, of Korean descent. And then I moved to Hong Kong in 2015. And while I was there, I started working with researchers in both Australia and the UK. So basically, I work across both disciplines and continents and continue to do so through today. So today's presentation is more about a hypothetical framework proposal that has evolved out of my practice-based research from across the last 10 or so years. Based on what I've heard in this conference so far, I'm sure that some of the content will overlap or resonate with what has already been stated. On the other hand, there may be some contradictions, and I will be honest, some of this information may become outdated by tomorrow. So ultimately, the main goal of this presentation is to provoke thoughts and questions that might lead to solutions and productive discussion across communities. So just to start off, the main question at hand, and I think my screen, there it goes, is how are embodied memories preserved and accessed? And some key elements to consider are the human body, lived experiences, and the need for a sense of embodiment. Just waiting for the slide to update. All right. So the roots of this research began all the way back in 2010. And I don't know why, but in the US, there seems to be a trend of dancers also studying to become archivists and librarians. And I happen to be one of those individuals. So back then, I was just mainly concerned with how to preserve dance, and more specifically, how to create a digital repository for both dancers and choreographers. This naturally led me to the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts and also the Dance Heritage Coalition. And then interestingly enough, to CDARE, also known as the Center for Dance Research at Coventry University. And then over time, around 2015, which is when I moved to Hong Kong, that's when I started to veer away more towards my original undergraduate studies in animation and started looking at virtual reality, motion capture, and the medical humanities as a way of illustrating medical narratives, or patient narratives rather. And where that started was from the realization that illnesses, even mental ones, elicit physical sensations within the body. And those sensations are actually quite difficult to communicate with other people. And as it turns out, I am definitely not the only person who has been concerned with this question. I think the largest community that I found is in the UK. And so I've been working with the Somatic Practice and Chronic Pain Network to discuss how to share these stories. And so a recurring theme has been whether motion capture, VR, and the Metaverse can be helpful. So before anybody starts jumping up and down, I do wish to acknowledge this list of lovely challenges that I think every single archivist or other information steward is very familiar with. And I do wish to reassure everybody that I have thought long and hard about all of these daily companions, I think. So it's not that what is coming next is a pipe dream or completely ignores all of these realities. And so I think while I've heard a lot about machine learning and AI at this conference, I'm not so sure I've heard about certain other technologies. So just to explain why the metaverse, mainly because you have the option of an online, multi-user, interactive, and immersive VR experience. And when I say VR, I'm referring to the 6 degrees of freedom, which allows you to move in all directions, rather than the 360 film that has been relatively popular. I do wish to emphasize, though, that this is more about the preservation of experiences, and that doesn't necessarily address the issue of preserving data. But I will come back to that, and for good reason. A little more specifically, some of the advantages that a virtual space offers is, first and foremost, digital and virtual embodiment. And trying to connect it back to things that I've heard archives visitors mention. So for example, being able to touch things or smell things. Also, connectivity and community, I believe, are essential because they provide the context for the content that is being viewed. And I've left enhancement a little vague because there's so many ways to enhance things. So the main point is that virtuality can help enhance physical reality. I'm anticipating at this point that there may be some confusion, questions, or even disputes about some of the concepts that I've mentioned so far. So I'll take a brief detour to clarify what I'm referring to. Most importantly, when I use the term metaverse, I am not referring to what Mark Zuckerberg has in mind. More specifically, I'm speaking about Neil Stephenson's concept of the metaverse as portrayed in Snow Crash. And I just realized I need to tell the control room, next slide, please. All right, great. So, yeah, so for anybody not familiar with Neil Stephenson and his novel Snow Crash, basically he describes a virtual society online with connections back to physical reality that is very dependent on having an avatar. But this avatar can do many things, and the actions that you carry out online have real-world repercussions. Just as a side note, Neil Stephenson has established his own company to build his own metaverse platform. So he is very actively taking back this concept that he established, but that was also built upon other sci-fi works, most specifically, I would say, William Gibson's Neuromancer. So yes, when I say metaverse, it's more about a network of immersive and interactive 3D virtual worlds. Supporting that would be machine learning and virtual reality. Machine learning because, honestly, a lot of the interactions that would make such a space believable need to happen in real time. So if everything is pre-recorded, it could lead to a very sort of artificial experience. Whereas with virtual reality, that's the immersion component. And again, referring to that headset that can cause vision issues and that are hopefully becoming more improved. Another thing to note is that machine learning can also help with generating content within that world. And that for VR, it's really incomplete until you have full haptic feedback in your body. So it's both areas are still a little incomplete. Next slide, please. And then getting a little more philosophical. So motion capture is usually a technical concept, but I just wanted to note that the methods by which to do motion capture have been evolving quite rapidly. And I have to actually say, I believe that one of the foremost experts, if not set of foremost experts, actually reside in Australia. So this is very interesting for me, how that happened. But underlying that, you need the motion capture in order to really elicit that sense of virtual embodiment. And that term can be found across a variety of disciplines, from philosophy to human-computer interaction. And in terms of philosophy, we're talking about phenomenology and philosophers such as Merleau-Ponty, whereas an HCI researcher will be talking about some other things. But maybe the important distinction between digital and virtual embodiment is that digital embodiment can be achieved just through interacting with your browser window by clicking a mouse. But virtual embodiment would be watching the arm of your avatar move and sort of feeling that that is your actual arm. So that's sort of the end goal for virtual embodiment. And so finally, embodied memories, again, another term that has a definition that changes based on the discipline you're in, but thinking more about bodily cognition rather than just mental cognition. And so to illustrate this, next slide, please. Just take a moment and think about the last time you had a stomach ache or another injury or illness. And as you go through that memory, think about the sensations that you are feeling in reaction. And then try to imagine sharing that reaction with someone right next to you, using simply words or other means. It's a little bit tricky. So next slide, please. And now just imagine a space where those memories could be viewed and interacted with. And then you essentially have why the metaverse might be a good idea for creating an archive of embodied memories. So next slide, please. As always, I do wish to acknowledge the existing and pre-existing work in this general area. I will not go over these case studies, but I just wish to acknowledge, for example, Daniel Braithwaite-Shirley recently carried out a series of motion capture and not quite oral history, more like body history workshops for Black trans people. And although that is an artist working in a museum, it had a lot of correlation to work, for example, by the University of Southern California's Shoah Foundation, who was interviewing Holocaust survivors and creating VR experiences. And also Holodance, which is more of a cultural heritage archive. And it is focused on dance, but they've done a lot of work when it comes to motion capture. So next slide, please. So finally, the framework, the proposed framework. I just wish to say, this is a very loose proposal, so it's not like each step must be followed in that order or that this is standard. It's more based off of my own experiences working as an independent researcher without funding or sometimes even any other collaborator. So it's really more of a starting point, especially if you don't have a lot of money, time, or people. But it does depend a little bit on having pre-existing knowledge, skills, or developing those. The main points are that with the concept, considering interactivity should happen right away. Because then while collecting the content, it helps save time as to what kind of content is going to be collected and how to collect it. And the good news with motion capture is that thanks to machine learning, it's a little bit cheaper to collect that data than it was before. But because you are collecting bodily data and personal experiences, ethics is a continuing theme throughout this framework. Particularly if dealing with something like illnesses or other traumatic experiences, I found that perhaps having a trained professional or specialist might be quite useful. So next slide, please. And then from there, when I say curation, I am referring specifically to data or digital curation as outlined by the DCC. But mocap data is particularly annoying for cleanup just because it's extremely time consuming. I think that's probably the costliest step after actually collecting the data. And in terms of creation, which is probably the most fun part, it's great. A lot of free tools are out there. They've become more user-friendly. I do wish to emphasize to not dismiss a platform like Roblox or VRChat. I know that there are games, but when you see how many users are on Roblox and how a lot of them are in the age 8 to 18 range, those will become the future adult users. So when they interact with any interface, they'll be most comfortable with that kind of environment already. So that leads to the question of access. And the reason why, again, the metaverse or metaverse platforms are so useful is that if you've ever tried programming basic user controls in something like Unity, it can actually be quite quirky and time-consuming. So now that they've made it easy to port from a creation engine into an actual active platform with an existing community, that saves a lot of time and trouble. And this honestly didn't really exist about 3 or 4 years ago. So it's really, really great to have that now. Next slide, please. So just as many questions just lead to more questions, these were some of my thoughts in reflection. I think I just wish to emphasize that the metaverse is not about mainly cryptocurrency or blockchain as much as marketers and other investors wish to say so. Or at least I hope that the financial world will not win out in that sense. I'm also looking forward to the possibility of an embodied search rather than just a purely textual search. But of course, that will have impact on how things are coded, organized, and of course, the ever important metadata. So next slide, please. And so in conclusion, it's really an ages-old problem. We just have some nice new emerging technology to work with. I can't say that this is the future possibility because I know for a fact that not only am I trying to build something right now, I know other people who are as well. It's just that it's not really standardized. The technology keeps changing. So there's a lot of questions left to explore. And I would be very curious to know if anybody else here is also exploring those questions. Thank you. Last slide, please.
Thank you. That was fascinating. My mind's blown a little on the idea of searching for body movements. Look, we're going to run over time, but I think it would be terrible to not be able to ask Eugenia any questions. I'm assuming we still have her. She's gone off the screen. Ah, there you are. Do we have any questions for Eugenia in the room or online? No, I'll ask one while people... Oh, no, we've got someone here. Go ahead.
I'll just grab the mic. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Eugenia. A lot of these environments, as they are popped up, these examples you've called back to Roblox and VR chat, these are very spontaneous sort of communities that sort of piece themselves together without a plan or any particular expectation of what they will become. How do you engage with something so spontaneous in the digital world? It's kind of like catching lightning in a bottle.
All right, so basically, for anybody who is familiar or unfamiliar with both of those platforms, basically as a world creator, you can actually moderate who enters, when the world is open, different controls like that, almost like a building. And in VR chat and Roblox, the game creators or world creators make it very clear what kind of community to expect in that world. Now, a lot of people just sort of release their worlds and they don't actively moderate it. But for example, there was a Korean university that for Ars Electronica did actively moderate a special world that they created and then sort of controlled and closed things up as needed. And more specifically within Roblox, you will notice that there's sort of a self-selecting community. So for example, people have built spaces dedicated to autism. Or more recently, Nike built a store/world in there. So it's probably better to think of each space in there as like a building. And if you're an archivist, you could essentially control access as needed, similar as to is done with a physical or a digital repository.
Fantastic, thank you. Any more questions? Yes, one here, thank you.
Louisa Moscato at Melbourne Grammar School. I'm a bit excited because, of course, so many students spend a lot of their time in metaverses and in gaming, and I really hadn't thought of it. I'd seen libraries presented in metaverses which enabled countries which have strict censorship laws to be bypassed. Have you ever seen an archive presented in those worlds? I'm certainly got a target market for one.
I think I'm still searching. All the platforms in general are not great for searching, and this is a little bit frustrating. I think I personally have not encountered one myself, but I would not be surprised if it exists, if that makes any sense. Given all the work that's been done in Minecraft already, I'm actually a little bit surprised that I have not heard about one on Roblox, for example.
Anything further? Look, the other room's applauding, which means we'll be at the back of the queue for lunch if we don't wrap up soon. So look, unfortunately, thank you so much, Eugenia, and to Janet and to Josephine. I don't know if you're still online with us, Josephine. Right, as predicted, I think we won't get to get our three speakers together, but I think you'll agree they've all been fascinating and challenging, and you can go away and talk over lunch about the intersections you saw between the three and maybe bail up Janet. She'll be at lunch, talk a bit more. Please join me in thanking all of our speakers. I think it's been such a great session. Enjoy lunch and we'll see you all at another session this afternoon.